All right. Well, I did something I guess it was Thursday night or Friday night or whatever. I went to the Midnight Madness at the mall. Anybody else there? Against all of my better judgment, I went there. My wife convinced me that I needed to go up there because they had a pair of shoes at 40% off between midnight and 8, and I didn't want to go early in the morning, so I went at midnight. And as I was standing around with thousands of people there was not one empty parking spot in the entire mall parking lot, which completely amazed me. Like I said, I didn't want to be there. While I was standing there, I looked around, and there were I noticed mostly women and girls. And I came across a study this last weekend that might help kind of explain that. Ladies, you need to know that it is a scientific fact that shopping is more stressful on men than it is on women. Do you know that? Any guys here want to say amen or something? According to a recent report in the Oregonian, British psychologist David Lewis found proof that shopping is hazardous to men's health. Testing volunteers ages 22 to 79 by sending them out Christmas shopping, he recorded blood pressure rates that, quote, you'd expect to see in a fighter pilot going into combat. In the same test, only 1 in 4 women showed any significant signs of stress from shopping. So guys, we actually have a medical excuse for how we are. And I told my wife, I'm not going back next year unless we get a note from the doctor. So there it is. But if it's not shopping that stresses it out, maybe it's the baking, it's money or trying to save money, or having all the relatives in and preparing for that, or any number of things can stress us out. I remember my wife and I's very first Christmas, we had our biggest disagreement that we've had at Christmas. We were going out to get a live Christmas tree, and it was going to be our first Christmas tree, and we were so excited, and so I go and borrow a friend's truck, and we drive down there to get it, and we get there, and I kind of look at her, I can tell something's wrong, and I said, what's wrong, honey? And she said, well, you just don't seem excited enough. Now, that was 13 years ago, and today I would say something different than my response was 13 years ago. But 13 years ago, I said, well, what? You want me to do, like, backflips or da-da-da-da? And that led into such a sharp disagreement that we ended up going home with no tree. All right? Anybody been there before? So we're home with no tree, not talking to each other, and this is supposed to be the happiest time of the year, and we're sitting there with no tree, and finally, we come to our senses and all that. But I had taken the truck back to my friend, and he was using it all day, so all we had was a Honda Civic. So we decided we're going to go get this tree. Doesn't matter, we're going to get the tree. So we drive all the way down there in our Civic, and I think, we'll just figure out a way. And what ended up happening is we bought a tree, and the only way we could fit it in our car is to roll down the back windows on both sides and have the tip of the tree hanging out this side and the bottom of the tree hanging out this side. So there we are, driving down the street with a tree hanging out both sides of the car. So there you go. If you don't have a truck, there's a solution for you. But our first Christmas, let me ask you this. How does stuff like that happen? How does it happen that going to get a tree that's supposed to be so fun and joyous and all that turns into a big fight? How does it happen in our lives that, we're getting ready to get these gifts and do all this stuff, it turns into such a stressor? How does gifts and gift giving and all that feed greed end up happening? How does that happen? Well, we know. We forget why it is we're doing what we're doing, don't we? We forget the purpose, and it's so easy to do. It can happen to all of us. And the thing we have to do is we have to go back and we have to look at and remember the reason why we're celebrating. We're celebrating because Jesus was born. That's why we celebrate. And today, what I want to do is I want us to look at the original Christmas story and just look at it. And I want to talk about 4 reasons why Jesus came. I know we know the story, and sometimes familiarity breeds contempt or at least boredom or whatever it is. But I want to look back at the story and just be amazed at the reasons why Christ came and what kind of incredible difference that makes in our lives. So let's jump into the story. Luke chapter 2, it's in your outlines there, written, or if you have your Bibles, turn there. Luke chapter 2, it says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Now let's just stop there. Luke who's a historian who's writing this letter, he introduces us to Caesar Augustus first, who is the leader or the ruler of one of the most powerful nations of all time, the Roman Empire, a true historical figure. Now, he was the son of Julius Caesar, and we have the Caesar family to thank for the haircuts and the salads, in case you're kind of wondering kind of where that came. Sorry, I had to do that. But this is the Caesar family, and yes, that's the one historical figure that Luke introduces us to. Augustus means the majestic, and this is representative of what they expected. They expected worship in their particular position. It says this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to his own town to register. Now, Quirinius, we're introduced to, is his governor. It's not like a governor today. Back then, it was more like Caesar Augustus is like the president, and Quirinius is a cabinet member, and he's in charge of taking this census. Now, back then, they took census for one of two reasons, really for two reasons. One was to make sure that they got all the money they could out of taxes, to make sure that they're getting it all, okay? So it's kind of motivated by money. And the second one was to make sure that they counted all the adult males to make sure that their army was big enough to defend their kingdom. So this is very power-related. This is very money-driven. This is very politically motivated, this census here. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. So he went back to Bethlehem because that's where he's from. That's how they did census, not door to door. But you went back to where you're from. So I'm from Oklahoma. I have to go back to Oklahoma to make sure I was counted as part of the census. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. So Luke, after introducing us to two rich and powerful people, Caesar Augustus and governor, he introduces us to two people that are very opposite of that. Very humble. They were poor. They were not urban, but rural. Powerless, not powerful. Joseph, think blue collar, think carpenter. Mary, think teenage girl, pledged to be married, pregnant, virgin. Just think very normal and ordinary couple here. And when you think Joseph and Mary, I want you to think stress, and I want you to think shame. First, shame. Back then, the Jewish culture was what's called an honor-shame culture. And that meant for you as an individual, your job, one of your primary goals in life, was to do things in such a way that it would bring honor to your family and to your community. And then if you did things that were out of line or immoral, the deal was that yes, you did that, and that's your responsibility, but the bigger deal was that it brought shame to your family. It brought shame to your community. And so imagine being Mary, and you're pregnant with child. Pledged to be married is not the same thing as married, and this is like a huge deal. In fact, it was punishable by death, and that is why Joseph decided to divorce her quietly, because he didn't want to expose her to public shame. So think shame. I mean, she's thinking, are people going to give me a chance to explain? Are they going to listen to my story? Are they going to believe me? And she's thinking about all the ways in which people are going to view her. Think stress. Remember, she is far along. Think maybe 6-7 months pregnant, okay? They had to go all the way back to Bethlehem, which was a 120-mile journey. Now, they didn't have planes, trains, and automobiles back then, so they had to do it on the back of a donkey, riding on a donkey. Now, ladies, if you've had a baby, I want you to imagine this. You're 7 months pregnant. You have to travel on the back of a donkey for 120 miles with no Taco Bells, no nurses, all the way there, only to arrive. What kind of mood would you be in, by the way? Only to arrive to find out that there was no more room for you in the nice hotels, the inn, and to be stuck in a barn. And the only place to put this baby was going to be a feeding trough for an animal. And the only thing to wrap this baby up in was swaddling cloths, which is the same thing as an ordinary rag that they used back then. And this is how you bring in the king of the world in. How would you feel? little stressful.